You are listening to the Marriage in Action podcast. We are Dustin and Alana Bookout, and we want to welcome you into our cozy living room where we chat about all the crazy marriage topics with a splash of TMI and a promise to keep it real.
In this episode, we're tackling... Oh, I thought you were going to say that.
I am supposed to say it.
This
is what happens when you do back-to-back episodes.
Okay. In this episode, we're tackling...
the talk with your kids.
So join us as we relive the moment of talking to our boys about sex and just the way we have decided to approach it in our family.
Because we mastered it and we are thebomb.com when it comes to this talk with our kids. Said no parent ever.
Yeah. All right. So we're walking down memory lane. We just finished recording the podcast, 3 Steps to Better Sex. And we mentioned this in the podcast and then decided, all right, let's just go ahead and record one more episode, get it under our belt. And
you're kind of out of frame here.
I'm out of frame. Sorry. If you're watching on YouTube, I was out of frame. Anyway, so we're going to walk down memory lane with you guys. And what we talked about in our last podcast was how a little bit we tackled the fact just growing up, especially in purity culture, we were taught sex was bad. It was wrong. It was nasty. It was sinful. You shouldn't like it. You shouldn't talk about it. That was just kind of the overall feeling of our generation, right?
Yeah. That is correct.
As I choke. Anyway, and so we had mentioned, like, we've done it differently. We've decided in our family we were going to do this differently with our kids. And so, of course, we want to share the stories of sharing with our boys, but also just taking it back to early childhood. I know with a lot of families, words get used instead of actual anatomical names. And with us, we have always used the anatomical names of, that's your penis. Now we only have 2 boys. We don't have girls, but ever since they were little, we used those words and we didn't fluff it in any way to be like, oh, that's your wee-wee. Like, we actually just talked about what it is because we didn't want our kids to feel like those words were weird.
Yeah.
We didn't want them to feel ashamed in using those words about their body. And so we've kind of always been open books, if you will. However, Dustin had alluded to the fact that one kid is like me, one kid is like him, because it's way more comfortable for me to be an open book than it is for Dustin to be an open book. Though I will say... I'm
already like kind of getting uncomfortable.
He's over here fidgeting in his chair a lot. No, you have grown so much.
I have grown so much, but it's still, to me, it's a hard subject to talk about.
Come over here, baby. Snuggle up.
It's not a super hard... Okay. It's a hard topic to talk about sometimes, but I've gotten so much better. So much better, at least, than one of our children has.
Well, I mean, to be fair, but we are going to do our best to not tell you which kid is which and to not name names because we want to just honor the fact that this is part of their story too. And anyway, we want to share this really because it gives us entertainment because it's great stories, but also because we want, especially for those of you who have not gotten there, maybe you've got younger kids and you're like, I don't know how to talk to my kids. We're just going to kind of tell you just our story in hopes that it helps. We really want to see this change. The Big C Church, I'm going to say it. The Big C Church sucks at talking about sex. We really need a safe place to talk about it. And if the church isn't going to do it, who's going to do it? And oftentimes it falls on the parents who we were not taught about it well. Many of us weren't taught about it well. We weren't, like we said in the last podcast, that's all I remember is this negative like umbrella of terror and shame that covered the topic, not this beautiful creation of what God designed it to be and look like.
Yeah, it was kind of the elephant in the room that no one talked about at church, and it was a topic that was always dodged or downplayed or made you feel like it was a terrible thing to be a part of,
Yeah. I have this thing in my throat. We had a podcast. We were guests on a podcast this morning. Then we recorded our own podcast. Now we're on the third one. And of course, now that we're talking about this topic, I'm like coughing up a storm. And I don't think...
It's the enemy. The enemy's trying to get in there.
Exactly. I'm like, I don't think this is a coincidence because we had, I would say, like, the enemy always wants to destroy sex. He wants to taint it. That's God's design, not Satan's design, first and foremost. But he wants to just turn it into this awful thing. And he's done a good job of that. Our world looks at it and lusts after it, and it's broken, and it's just terrible. And so now that we're taking a stand on how can we talk about this for our next generation, and I'm over here having a choking fit. I don't think that's by just happenstance. Anyway, so for starters, like we shared, we started off very young using correct terminology and not making it weird, because it can be like for Dustin, I know it was a little harder for him. We grew up in different circumstances and had different worldviews. So to say, yes, that's your penis, that's not necessarily something that was comfortable at first for him. And catch yourself, parents, when you're saying those things, to not make it sound shameful or disgusting or weird or whatever. If you can say it in confidence and truth, that is what it is. Your kids pick up on those little cues. And so if you are carrying shame around the sex topic or body parts or whatnot, your kids pick up on that. They absolutely pick up on that. So that's just one thing of like easing your way into the talk, is start them off young, where you talk anatomically correct. And I will say for us, we've shared about, I'm going to talk a lot on this podcast, aren't I?
It's all good, babe. It's all good.
I know that we've shared that I'm the toucher that, look at me, if you're watching, I'm already a handsy on Dustin. And Dustin was not. Like, he didn't grow up in a touchy home, if you will. We always use the example of like, I grew up eating pancakes with my dad coming in, slapping my mom's butt and kissing her on the neck. Like, that was the norm. So I thought that was the norm that was going to be the norm for my marriage versus Dustin's experience.
And my experience was my parents would literally just give each other a little peck here, a little peck there, and no physical signs of affection as far as I saw growing up. And so that definitely transferred into how I approached relationships in our marriage, and what I thought was normal versus what she thought was normal. And at the beginning, that was a very hard thing for you to deal with.
Yeah, and neither one of those are wrong. It just so happens that Dustin brings his idea of what this physical affection should be, and I brought my idea of what physical affection should be, and it was different. So we have done our best job at being affectionate in front of our kids in a way that they can physically see, love and affection, and that not be a weird thing.
Sometimes I do say, ooh, gross, or, oh, they're kissing again.
And we're like, oh, yeah, we are. Yeah, we are. Anyway, all right. So fast forward to along the way, like they're older and they're starting to ask questions. Maybe it's like, why, how did the lady get pregnant, or how did a baby get in her belly? And I will say one of the big mistakes that we make as a society, if you will, is we make up all these fairy tale things like the tooth fairy and not to say that stuff isn't fun, but, and fun to pretend that there's a Santa or whatever. But when you start doing that, just think of how that plays a part. Like even when it comes to how is a baby in their belly. And it's like, we even see it in movies. A stork comes, like all these little cartoon movies and stuff. And a stork comes and just drops the baby off, or God wanted her to have a baby and put it in her belly or whatever. And so you as the parent have to have the discernment of what your child is ready for, because our sons were asking, they're not just mine, are they?
Yeah, I mean, I had a little bit to do with it, just saying.
Our sons were asking us questions when they were young, like, how did she get a baby? And that doesn't mean I'm going to go into, well, he inserted the penis into, like, I'm not going to start into that when as the parent, discernment wise, they're not ready for all of this conversation. So you can make steps to that. And that's really on you and your discernment and what you think your child, what's appropriate for them at that stage. But little by little, we would just say things that were correct. Like when a husband and a wife want to have a baby, they might pray about it, they might talk about it, and then they will make a baby together. And you can use those terms in, when your kid is 6 or whatever. Well, as they got older, we got to a point. Look at this.
There it is. The enemy's trying to stop you.
As they got older, and this goes with more things than just sex, but we would often ask, do you really want to know? Because they will ask questions sometimes, and I would say, do you really want to know the answer to that? And then they would say no. It's like, give your kids some credit, because they probably know a lot more than you think they know. But do you really want me to explain? And you can always start off with a kind of an umbrella answer. And then, do you want to know more details? Do you want to know the details? And so let's fast forward to, for one of our sons, we got to have this talk in the Whataburger parking lot. And it was really because we saw them do something, like make a motion.
They made a gesture.
And we asked, do you know what that means?
And I will say, we were on a family trip, and they were around other boy cousins of theirs, and they saw the other boy cousins doing that, or he saw the other boy cousin doing that, so he did that as well. And we kind of took that as a sign of, okay, we need to explain to him what he's doing so he knows why it's wrong.
Yeah.
And that led to us driving to Whataburger and having a conversation in the parking lot of Whataburger.
Scars him for life, I'm sure.
But Whataburger is his favorite restaurant.
But what was cool about that was that, with that gesture, we wanted to make sure he understood what that meant, so that he didn't just, do that around other people. And we were like, do you know what that stands for? And so we're not planning on having the talk, but we wanted him to at least know what that was. But that, of course, led to the talk, and his reaction was not like, let me know more about this. I don't know that he asked many questions.
He didn't ask a lot of questions at all. I think he was just so, I don't know if caught off guard was the right word, but maybe it is.
Well, and to be fair, I think he felt embarrassed for making that gesture, not knowing what it stood for. And then he didn't like what it stood for. He was like, oh gosh. But we didn't want to just sugarcoat it. We didn't want to just say, oh, that's bad. Don't make that. That's a bad gesture, because we wanted him to know what that meant and not feel shame about it. We weren't mad at him. We just wanted him to know so that he could make the decision. They always have free will, right? We wanted him to be able to make the decision of, do I want to make that gesture again? Because I didn't know what that was before. So we did our best to not make it embarrassing, or not make it shameful, should I say. We didn't want to shame him into anything. We just wanted to be truthful with him. And we've always made sure our kids know, listen, you are going to hear things from your friends. You're going to see things that other people might, like those gestures. You're going to see this kind of stuff, and you can take what they say as fact. But let me tell you, they're not experienced like mom and dad are. So come to us, ask us these things, just like we had this conversation just now. He's eating Whataburger, and he's eating his burger and his fries and his milkshake. I think we got him while we're having this conversation. And we're just saying, listen, we want you to be able to come to us and ask us anything that you know, because we want to tell you the truth. We don't want to code it and make it sound like it's fluffy or funny or what. We just want to tell you the truth, because we don't want you to not know these things in full. And that's what happens so often with kids. So that was one experience. And
Well, and I want to rewind to back when I was about that same age, and my parents sat me, or my mom sat me down, and she literally had this book that was kind of a step-by-step process of how to tell your child about the birds and the bees, or sex, or what, I can't remember what the exact title was, but I could sense and feel the discomfort in my mom. Therefore, that was transferred onto me. So it was uncomfortable for her and for me. And I think that's genuinely probably why I always had that feeling, or one of the reasons I've always had that feeling towards that subject when it came to talking about that, is that discomfort when I was getting educated about it made me feel uncomfortable, because there was also uncertainty that I felt in that conversation as well.
And that's the thing. I mean, all of us parents are trying to do the right thing, and we don't always do, the best thing. I never had that talk. My parents never had that talk with me. So as much as I saw them being affectionate, they never had that talk with me. The only talks I ever received were from youth group, which were scary. Like we said in the last podcast, it was like a lot of pictures of STDs.
If you do this will happen to you.
Right. And in fifth grade, I think it was fifth grade, like our parents had to sign off that we would, have sex ed or whatever it was. And I don't remember anything positive. Yeah. Nobody talks about God's design for sex. So, it's just like we're out here with, neither one of us had the best example to.
Have you heard my story about when they came in sixth grade and talked to us about sex?
I don't know. Tell me.
They had this lady come in, and she gave this basically the talk to the whole school, to the whole sixth grade. And at the very end, she said, and because I did this, I am now HIV positive. And basic because she had sex.
So it was another shame.
And so
fear.
It was, and this is in the 90s when HIV positive was like scary. Like you didn't know, there was not much known about it. Therefore, it was like you could see the whole classroom step back like, am I going to get it? I mean, we had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, there was so much fear instilled and shame instilled in us growing up. I mean, just youth group, really. Like and not even just the youth group. It was just like the big C church, like the big Christian community. It's just, you don't talk about it, or it's dirty or nasty or what. And so keep that in mind. These kids that you're rearing, you're helping raise, I really want to see a change in this next generation so that they're not walking into marriage feeling shame or feeling like it's dirty or whatever. Why can't we be telling our kids, this is the coolest thing that God created? It is one of the coolest things. It is the best thing he created for marriage. And that's exactly what we've done, which I want to jump into the other kid that we had the conversation with.
This was a more successful conversation, I think.
It really was. And that is just, personality is different. So just know we've had both. We've had the experience with the kid who was like, please stop talking about this. Like, I do not want to talk about this anymore. I've heard enough. And then we had the other kid who this was the best. So I've got to just lay the framework down for this.
I honestly can't remember how it started.
It's late at night. Dustin is about to go to bed. I am about to go to bed, but I'm in the living room / kitchen, and my son was asking me questions. Like we were asking truth or dare questions, I think it was. And so he asks me a truth question and says, do you know any secrets? And I said, well, I'm sure I do, I was like, do you know any secrets? And he was like, yes. I was like, what's the secret? And
I remember now.
And so he was like, oh, I can't tell you. And I was like, okay, well, if you want to tell me, I would love for you to tell me. But I had no idea where this was going, by the way, because also we're about to go to bed, right? And so anyway, I just have to say this story because it is by far the best. So just brace yourself because you might be here a while. So he keeps bringing it up. I can tell he wants to talk about it, but I can also tell he has a lot of fear with it. And so I'm like, you know how I always respond with you. I'm a safe place. Like, I'm reminding him, I'm a safe place to talk to. Like, you're not going to get in trouble. I want you to be able to share with me if you want. And so after a while talking back and forth of him saying, I am going to share, I'm not going to share, he had already told me that it was wrong. It was something that was, I can't remember his exact wording, but it was something like it was a bad thing, I think is how he described it. And so he ends up saying, I know what sex means. And so I said, you do? And he was like, mm-hmm. And I said, well, first of all, I don't think you know what it means, because it's definitely not bad. And he was like, really? It was so cool to see his face change, because he thought he was bringing up something that I was going to get mad at, or that he was going to get in trouble for, or that was something that was bad. And so I immediately nipped that right in the butt. Yeah. I'm like, first of all, you don't know what it is, because it's not bad. And he was just lit up like, really? It's not? And I said, no. And then I asked him, do you want to know more about it? And he said, yes. And I said, do you want to know everything about it? Yes. So he's on the couch and I'm also on the other side of the couch, and I just start just freely giving it out. And so I used our chickens as an example because often he has made comments about eggs, and I told him we had to have a rooster in order for the eggs to turn into chicks. And so he knew that part. And so I just said, you know how we had to get our rooster in order for us to have, for our hens to lay fertile eggs and for those eggs to turn into chicks. So I just started to describe that part. And about this time, in walks Dustin. Who's ready to go to bed, who is also not the natural open book minded person in the family, versus I could be super beyond open book.
Well, it's in the intro. I mean, with a little bit of TMI. I mean,
and he's just like, oh my gosh, we're having this conversation. And so you can just tell, but he did a great job.
I'd already brushed my teeth. I mean, I was headed to bed.
Okay, so this was where it just gets really good, because I did ask for permission if he wanted to know all the details. And I don't need to spell that out all for you guys, because you guys already know the details of this, but I'm going to give you a little bit so you can see just how I explained it. But I did start out with our chickens, because that was just something.
Why not?
Well, and it was relevant to him.
That's
so
true.
You have to think of where is a good starting point. You don't even have to have an intro to that. I had just brought that up because it was something he had just talked about recently. And so anyway, so here he is on the other end of the couch, and his eyes are just glued to me. He is all ears. He just cannot wait to hear all of these details. And so then I also made sure he realized, I was like, remember when I said that this is a good thing? God created this. And he was like, he did? I'm like, yes, he created this. So it's the best thing. It's so good. And it's so fun. Let me tell you about it. So I start just explaining, a woman's body. He already knows the anatomical stuff, because remember, this is something we've already taught him. He already knows the body parts. So I just explained to him what an erection is, why an erection happens, what intercourse is, and just what happens as far as the body goes for a man and how that helps the sperm get to where it needs to go. And I'm explaining all of these details. And if you're watching on YouTube, this is my son. He's got his hands like this, and he just leans back on the couch. And I was asking him along the way, like, do you want me to keep explaining this? And yes. And he says, this is the best conversation of my life.
He was so excited.
He was so excited. And I think that was because there was not an ounce of disgust. There was not an ounce.
No shame was put on him.
Shame. There was not an ounce of sinfulness. It was nothing but like, isn't this so cool that God knew this was his design, and God knew to create a man like that and a woman like this, and for this to take place. And have you ever heard the vows, like the two become one? He wants you to become one, and it's fun and it feels good, but God designed this for a husband and a wife to enjoy together. So can other people do this outside of marriage? Yes, but there are consequences to that. God does not want you to have those consequences on your life. He wants you to enjoy this with your spouse. And so I'm explaining all of this, and he is just smiling and big eyes.
Beaming.
Yes, beaming is the better word. Beaming and just wanting me to tell him more. My best part was, this is kind of skipping ahead, but at the end I said, is there anything else you want to know? Do you remember what he said?
I have a feeling what you're getting ready to say, but I can't remember.
And he says, can you just show me the motion? Can you just show me the motion? And Dustin's like, oh, nope. Okay. And so I'm like, honey, I understand you want that, but that kind of crosses a line. You don't need anybody to show you the motions. But it was
not happening. Not happening, Captain. Sorry.
But that's the level of excitement he had. And I really think it's because that was the level of excitement we were sharing with him, that this is something to look forward to. And so he was like, so wait, did you do this when you had me and, brother? And we were like, yes. And he's like, do you do this other times too? And we're like, we love to do this. Like, we love that God created this for us. And he was like, so you do that? Is this why your door is closed sometimes? We're like, yes, it is. And if it's locked,
yes, it is. If it's locked, don't.
That's why we don't want you to come in, because that's just for mom and dad to experience. And when you're married, that's just for you and your wife to experience. You don't want your kids to have to experience any part of that.
Trust me, you don't.
And so we were just talking, and then he's asking like, well, does Mimi and Papa still do that? Like, he was asking about other people, like his grandparents. Those are my parents, Mimi and Papa. And I'm like, well, I would say yes. Like, it was just, he was going through the motions, like our pastor, and you think they do that? I'm like, honey, sex is awesome. Like, that's what God wants for you, to be able to connect with your spouse. And he says, you think I'm going to do that when I get married? Yes. And you're going to love it. And you're going to be able to enjoy it with your wife. And hopefully y'all can do that in a way that God created you to do. So it was a really great conversation. We had, laughs along the way when he wants to know the motions.
Do you remember what he wanted to do when it was over?
Yes. With my mom?
Yes.
Yes. So when we finished talking,
I was like, he asked this question and I was just floored. I couldn't believe that we had gone to this level.
Yeah. He, at the end.
This is how good of a job. This is how good the conversation was.
At the end, he's like, are you going to tell Mimi or should I? This is my mom. Are you going to tell Mimi or should I? And I was like, she doesn't have to know this. And he's like, oh no, I want to tell her. I was like, okay. So we had to FaceTime my mother. So I'm going to hold my phone up. So for you on YouTube, and he's just beaming with that phone, and my mom's face pops up, and she's just smiling. She has no clue. I've not been able to text her. She has no heads up for this, right? And so, our son is like, Mimi, guess what I just learned? And she's like, what? And she's, what did you learn? And he's like, just guess. And she's just, out of left field. And then he says, it's what married people do. And she looks at me like, you can tell she was looking at me for approval to like go forward with this conversation. Like, is this what he's really talking about? And I kind of gave a nod, and she's like, did you learn about sex? And he's like, yes. Did you know God created sex?
It was so precious because he was so excited to share with his family what he'd learned.
Yeah. And that this is a beautiful thing, and God created that. And it was
adorable, but it was just so funny because I was like, I can't wait to call all my grandparents and tell them that I learned about sex.
Yeah. And my mom said, do you know this is the best phone call that I've received. Like, she was so excited just to see his excitement. The other thing I will say, the other tip, the thing that we had a conversation with him is we said, you have got to keep this to yourself. If you want to talk, if you have more questions, no one else do you go to, not your friends, not other people. Like, you come to mom or dad and you ask us the questions, because that's the safe place. All right. Plus, your friends might not be ready for this conversation, and that is not for them to decide. That is for their parents to decide. Mm-hmm. So we do not want you to have this conversation with anybody else. You can talk to us as much as you want, but not with anybody else, because you need to make sure that you keep your mouth, just directed at us, so that your friends don't hear something that you say that their parents are not ready for them to hear. And I think he really did honor that. And he's asked us questions. In fact, that night he wanted to sleep in our room. And so we moved his mattress at the foot of our bed, and he was just tossing and turning. I said, "Are you going to be able to fall asleep?" And he's like, I just can't stop thinking about it. I just can't stop thinking about it. That was such a good conversation. He was just so excited, which makes me excited to see his, just like, isn't that the heart of God? Like, that wants our kids to know there is no shame in God's creation. There is no shame in God's creation. And I just wish I would have had that same joy and excitement and just like pureness that you could see over him, over this topic. It was just been so cool. But recently we had to have another conversation with him because of something that was said at school. And it was so cool because I know he feels safe talking with us. He brought it up. He didn't understand what a condom was. We had not talked about that. And so just not understanding what that meant, and why would somebody say a condom breaks and that was why you were born, because a condom broke or something, and didn't understand that. Yeah. And so again, if you start off with your kids young and using anatomical correct language, as they grow older or they have questions, and you're able to just say, oh, a condom? Oh yeah, I didn't realize we didn't talk about that. A condom is, what is put over a penis, and you're just able to use it in a way that they're not like, oh my gosh, mom just said the penis word, because they've been hearing this since they were 2. Just things like that.
Yeah, he just was confused and didn't quite understand, or I don't think he at all understood.
I don't think he knew what it was at all,
and I was so glad that he was comfortable enough to bring that conversation up. And it was a great conversation that we had. It was simple.
Yeah. And he was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Yeah. And again, just a reminder to them, this is a conversation between us. But it's been so cool to see both of our boys, one necessarily isn't the most gangbusters about talking about it, but at least will still ask us questions and has. And the other one is a lot more gangbusters talking about it. Like, sure, I'll ask you this question. But we just, throughout our marriage, throughout parenting, have wanted them to know we are always a safe place. Doesn't matter if it's about drugs, if it's about sex, if it's about questions about Bible stuff, if it's just life in general. We want them to feel safe and never make them feel shameful, or make them feel shamed in asking a question. And so anyway, I hope that you enjoyed the the story and maybe got some tips. I mean, for those of you who have already had these talks with your kids, you probably have better tips than we've just provided. But if this is something that's coming up in your parenting, and you're like, I don't even know how to start the conversation, just pray about it. There are lots of books out there, but I'd be lying if I told you I looked at any of them, because I didn't. It was just, this is how we view sex. This is what we wish we would have, experienced with the sex talk for our own selves. And this was what we wanted to provide for our kids as they grew up. And so I hope that you have some sort of
chains.
Yeah. I hope you have some sort of nugget that you're able to leave with.
And we'd love to hear your feedback on this too, or if there's any questions, we can maybe do a part 2. But
yeah,
we would love to hear your feedback and on this episode. And please leave a review as far as this podcast as well.
Yeah. Okay. So guys, we're new to this, and we would love to start incorporating reviews into our podcast. Our friends Lisa and Brad at Unrelenting Pursuit, they've got a fabulous podcast. They always read a review at the beginning of their podcast, and I want to be a total copycatter and do that too. And so we would just ask if you can leave an honest review, because we would like to start sharing that. And of course, if you subscribe or just rate, that of course helps us. And more than anything, share it with somebody, maybe your spouse or a friend. But if you would like to watch this, it is on our YouTube channel, Marriage in Action. You can also visit our website, marriageinaction.com. And of course, all the daily fun happens on our Instagram page. You can find that at marriageinaction_. So we'll be back again next time. Thanks for tuning in.